In 2010, Yale historian Tim Snyder published a new history, kind of a shocking new history of World War II. Professor Snyder specializes in the history of Central and Eastern Europe, and the book was called Bloodlands: Europe Between Hitler and Stalin. That book took on, really for the first time, what happened in total on the land east of Berlin and west of Moscow between 1933 and 1945. He elected to do something that nobody had ever really tried to do about that geography in the world in that time. He told a single history, a single story of the 14 million people who were killed in that part of the world while both Hitler and Stalin held power. 14 million people who were not soldiers, civilian non-combatants, not people who were caught in the crossfire while countries were trying to kill each other's soldiers. These were victims of mass killings sanctioned by policy in Western Russia and Belarus and Poland and Ukraine and the Baltic states, all in the same place, all from two different dictators over a 12-year time span. Again, not war casualties in the sense of combatants, but war casualties in the sense of mass killing being a policy. Professor Snyder's book is recognized and was soon recognized as a gigantic achievement in modern history. It's, of course, all the more relevant because of the war in Ukraine now. This week, Professor Snyder published an updated paperback version of Bloodlands. This one has a new afterword, which offers a contemporary look at the work. In it, among many other things, Professor Snyder reflects on his contribution to popularizing the use of the term the big lie in reference to former President Trump's effort to basically overthrow the U.S. government last year, persuading his followers to believe the big lie that the 2020 election was somehow stolen, even though there was never, ever any evidence to support that. Snyder says in his new afterword, quote, "The big lie, a term that originates with Hitler, became central to American political discourse after I applied it to Trump's claim to have won an election that he had lost. The concept of the big lie, which I reintroduced into discussion in 2019 and 2020, helped millions of people see how mendacity of a certain scale affects politics over time, making democracy ever more difficult." Joining us now is Timothy Snyder. He is professor of history at Yale University. He's the author of Bloodlands: Europe Between Hitler and Stalin. Again, it is out in a new edition this week. Professor Snyder, it's really nice to have you here in person. I don't do this anymore. It's nice to see you.
It's a thrill to see you.
Let me ask you about that last quote that I just read. Mendacity of a certain scale. How mendacity of a certain scale affects politics over time. Can you just tell us what you mean?
Well, that's the public relations advice is from Hitler. Hitler says if you tell a lie that's of a certain scale, that's big enough, people won't believe that you could deceive them on that scale. And since they believe it, they've taken it at first, they don't want to disbelieve it later on. It becomes part of their life. It becomes what we now call an alternative reality. It begins to shape politics. It then begins to instantiate itself not only in memory, but in policy. You act as if it's true, and then you move on to do things as though it were true. So in our example, if we pretend that Trump won the election in 2020, then we have an argument for suppressing votes, because we can say, well, there was fraud, therefore we should suppress votes.
It's because of the sort of commitment part of that, it makes it feel undoable. Because if X number of people become invested in it because they have once believed it,
right,
and it would challenge their understanding of who they are and their worth in the world to lose that belief in it. It makes me worry about the ability to sort of unwire people to learn the truth.
I mean, this is why lying is so dangerous in politics. We've gotten very casual about lying. We've gotten very casual about the people who bring us the truth, who are the reporters. We've gotten very casual about the historians. We're passing memory laws in this country, just as Russia has passed memory laws. And those are laws designed in both cases to allow us to avoid the difficult little truths that might prevent us from investing in the big lies. And the problem with the citizens in the big lies, people in general in the big lies, is that once you do something, for example, storm a Capitol, once you do something, that makes it more true, right? So the politicians tell the big lie, but once we're brought in, once we do something, or in this book, for example, once you kill on the basis of a big lie, then the big lie really has to be true.
One of the things that I have sort of taken with me from Bloodlands is the idea that people need to be erased and countries need to be erased and certain identities need to be erased for the purposes of other countries, other leaders, other imperatives. And so, talking, for example, about the mass murder of the Polish elite, so that the Polish people could somehow be erased from history, that the idea of Poland as a place could somehow be subverted into some other thing that was more politically useful for the attackers. That kind of eliminationist planning, not just genocidal, but literally to erase the idea of a people. We are seeing that so overtly in the way that Putin is talking about Ukraine right now. I am very worried that we are starting to talk in eliminationist terms about some of our fellow Americans, the way that we're using not just epithets, but also sort of classifications of people as not just our political opponents, but as inhuman.
The German invasion of Poland in 1939 has really been on my mind, too, because it's not just how Putin's describing Ukrainians. As you say, he says the Ukrainians aren't a nation, they're not really a state. And that's genocide talk. That's how you talk before you try to eliminate the nation and the state. But it's not just talk. This war of aggression is also a war of destruction. They've deported about 1 million Ukrainians. That's a considerable share of the population. They're shooting the local elites. They're killing the men they think are capable of taking part in military activity. They're re-educating the teachers and the children. They're going through with this idea as best they can of trying to eliminate the Ukrainian nation. And you're right, it starts with talk. And that's why we look on these examples of how Russians treat their history, how they treat their reporters, how they treat their language, and we have to learn these lessons in time. Because as you say, if we talk about our own reporters, our own fellow citizens in the same way, then we're preparing ourselves to do terrible things.
Timothy Snyder, you know him here on this show as the author of On Tyranny, which we have discussed many times here on this show. The book that is seen as his sort of totem in the world of modern history is called Bloodlands, and it's out in a new edition as of this week with a new afterword about the world today. Dr. Snyder, it's an honor to have you here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.